Korea is often spoken of as being the forgotten war because it's sandwiched in between World War II and Vietnam. But I hope that Ronald and the other survivors appreciated that yesterday we held an assembly with almost 1,000 students at Saugerty Central School District so that they could hear these stories firsthand. Because as superintendent of Saugerty Central School District, I felt it was my responsibility to ensure that students had an opportunity to learn firsthand history, because we're charged with trying to ensure that our youths know about what happened, and yet we also have to somehow fit it into 180 days, and we maybe get a few paragraphs in a textbook to cover information. And I, as the leader of that district, know that that is not sufficient. So that's why we delved into this endeavor and worked hand in hand with Bob Willis and so many others to pull off this type of event. But without further ado, I'd like to bring up our first Medal of Honor recipient. Please give a round of applause to Ronald Rosser.
I'd like to thank the gentleman there for saying all those nice things about me. Of course, he was lying about me being a scholar and a gentleman. I'm a sergeant in the United States Army, retired. I finished my first enlistment in 1949, and got out of the Army. My kid brother was killed in action in early 1951, February 51. I re-enlisted and volunteered for combat duty Korea. The Army was very grateful and sent me there immediately. I arrived in Korea toward the end of July 1951, and they sent me up to Heavy Motor Company because I had a background of 3 years with heavy motors. I was trained as a first gunner, and I was trained in fire direction and as a forward observer. So the company commander told me, he said, Rosser, he said, I'm going to assign you to the third platoon as a first gunner. And I said, sir, I'm going up on line. He said, Rosser, he said, I'm going to tell you something. He said, I'm in charge of the company, and I tell you where you're going and when you're going. He said, you're going to the third platoon. I said, Captain, I'm going up on line. He said, oh, no, you're not. And I said, I can't think of a way you can stop me. And he looked at me real funny. Privates don't normally talk that way to captains, you know, but I was very determined. And so he said, well, the only people we have online are radio operators and forward observers. And I said, sir, I'm the best forward observer you ever seen. And he said, we don't need one. And just out of the crowd, somebody said, Sergeant Friedel just lost another radio man. And I said, I'm also the best RTO you ever seen. And he said, okay, you're going online. So I went up as a radio man for the Forward Observer, and it was somewhere between 3 and 4 days later, this Sergeant Friedel went down, and I became the Forward Observer. In my time in Korea, I had 8 radio operators. I lost 7 of them, 3 killed and 4 wounded, and one of the wounded actually got out of the hospital and come back with me, and he got hit again. I got hit 4 times, kind of nicked a little bit. In fact, they almost missed me. I went into combat on a place called the Bloody Ridge, and it was very, very first fighting. Everything was close. Fire was always heavy. There was a couple comical things that happened up there. One day up there, late in the afternoon, I was strafed by my unit was strafed by a North Korean plane called a Yak. He came in and strafed us, and he hit the side of the mountain, but none of us. And the next day, another Yak came in, and he dropped a bomb on us. He missed the whole mountain, and we stood up and cheered. And as he was heading up through this gap in the mountains, an F-86 came in on him there, and he met the great Buddha right now. And the pilot got him a kill, and on his way to being an ace in the U.S. Air Force. From the Bloody Ridge, I went into a place called the Heartbreak Ridge, and it was probably some of the fiercest fighting in the Korean War. In the first 3 months I was there on the Bloody and the Heartbreak Ridge, my unit alone lost over 6,000 men. It was very fierce, and kind of like World War I, where you actually charge the enemy positions. When the Koreans come at us in a banzai assault there, it was a suicide mission. When we did it, it was a planned assault. I never did figure it out. I was involved in some really fierce fighting up there. In fact, when the President Clinton dedicated the Korean War Memorial down in Washington, he had me up on the dais with him, and him and the President of Korea, and President Clinton used me in about a third of his speech as the example of the hand-to-hand fighting up on the Heartbreak. And so before he dedicated this thing, he came in this tent to see me, and he said, "Sergeant Rosser, it's my understanding that you have killed several people in hand-to-hand combat." I said, "That's true, Mr. President, but I have to tell you the truth, sir. None of it was my idea." And so then from the Heartbreak Ridge, my unit, regiment, was pulled back into Corps Reserve because there was only about a third of us left. And everybody went into Corps Reserve, but my unit, Heavy Motor Company, and so they moved in behind the Turkish Brigade up in the Kumwa Valley called the Iron Triangle, and I went up with the Turkish Brigade as a Fort Observer, and I served with them for about 3 weeks before my regiment got up to strength and was rearmed, and then they replaced the Turkish Brigade. As soon as my regiment got online, we started what we call aggressive patrolling and recon and combat patrols and whatever. And to give you an idea of what it was like, the day before Christmas, 1951, I went out with a reinforced platoon there was 73 of us went out. We got out, pretty close to 1.5 miles behind enemy lines. And we were overrun by the Chinese. And when we tried to break free, everybody's rolling around on the ground going at it with rifle butts and trench knives and whatever. And about 20 of us broke free and fought our way to the river, and they was overrunning us on the river. They were running on top of us, and we was shooting them, and they was falling over top of us down into the river, sliding out on the river on the ice. And we was losing people on the riverbank, so we decided to try to cross the river. And I took a rifle and beat my way through the ice on the edge of the river for us to get in. And we started to cross the river. And before we got over there, about 300 Chinese come down the other bank, and they had us trapped in the river, so we had to swim for us. There was about 20 of us got into the river. As we was going down the river trying to get out, the Chinese were running down both banks throwing hand grenades at us and shooting at us with submachine guns. And we finally got close to our outpost, and they brought fire in on the enemy, and 6 of us got out of the river. I was the only one that wasn't wounded. About a week later, they sent another reinforced platoon out behind a mountain beside of the one we were on, and about 73 men again, and I was supposed to cover them when they come back in my area. I could hear the firing, but nobody ever come out. About a week later, they decided to send a reinforced company out behind enemy lines, the same way I went out the day before Christmas. And it was Love Company reinforced, and we started out we were supposed to sneak up on the enemy and assault their mountain and take it, but we sneaked out in the daytime, you know, and you can imagine what was happening there. They could see us coming all the way, and we lost 40 or 50 just getting down around the side of the mountain. We dropped off of a platoon, and they hit the front of the mountain as a diversion, and to kind of to sucker the Chinese in. And as we got past that particular point, I started calling in mortar fire on the top of the mountain. And as we moved about a half a mile out behind the mountain, I just kept moving my mortar fire back across the mountain and kind of messing up their, you know, what they had planned. And we got to the back of the mountain, and we assaulted the back of the mountain. We had to go through several trenches and bunkers and whatever, going up the side of the mountain. And by the time we got within about 40 yards of the top of the mountain, of the 170 of us that started out, the platoon had hit the front of the mountain. 9 men lived, and they were all wounded. And when we got up to within 40, from the back, about 40 yards from the top of the mountain, there was 35 of us left, and counting walking wounded. And I got on my radio and called back to my regimental commander, and I gave him an assessment of what was going on, you know, down to 35 effectives, about out of ammunition, request orders. And he knew me, and but he wanted to talk to an officer. We had 2 officers still alive. The company commander had been hit in the face, across the face. His whole face was cut in 2, including his nose, and it was about 20 below zero, so his whole face was frozen blood. And the other officer that was still alive was the artillery report observer, and he was shot in the upper chest. So I dragged my radio up to the captain, who had difficulty talking, and I told him, the colonel wants to talk to you. And the colonel told him, he said, Captain, I want you to reorganize your people and make one final attempt to take the hill. And the captain said, yes, sir. And I heard somebody say, I'll take him up for you, Captain. And I realized I'd opened my darn big mouth again, and I was in trouble because I just volunteered to lead 35 men up against 3 battalions of Chinese dug in. And so the captain said, well, how are you going to do it, Ron? And I said, the only way I know, sir, is straight in shooting. And I said, if we make the first trench, we got a chance. He said, you know you're not going to make it. And I said, well, we'll give it a try. So I went over and got all these men and got them in behind me. And I told them, you know, what we were going to do. And I said, you're not going to have any trouble knowing which way to go, boys. Just follow me, because I'm going in shooting. And so I got up there, and I got them lined up, and I said, let's go. And I never even looked back. I started up the hill, dog trotting up the hill and moving faster. And as I went, and when I got about 2 feet from the Chinese, they were in the trench, and I was on the other side of the dirt. I looked back, and I was by myself. All the other guys had got knocked down behind me. And I couldn't get away from them, and I knew that, you know, they'd shoot me if I tried to run. And if I stayed there, they'd shoot me. And I thought, well, that went to a lot of trouble to get to Korea. They ain't no use wasting the whole damn day. And I let out a war whoop and jumped in the trench with them. And I guess in Ireland they called it a Donnybrook, but we had a mess. I want to tell you, the first group I ran into, there was 8 of them crouched down with submachine guns, 7 in front of me and 1 behind me. And I jumped down on top of the first one, or the second one, and we were so close, I stuck my carbine in his ear and blew off the other ear. The one behind me there stuck me in the back with his burp gun, and I spun around to get him, and I could almost feel the bullets coming through me, but he didn't get a chance to fire. I shot him in the neck, and he fell backwards and then dove forward. He dropped his gun, grabbed me by the leg, and I hit him with my rifle, knocked him off of him, and put him to sleep. And I turned around and started running down the trench right into him. There was just a line of Chinese, and as I was going, I was shooting them, and I actually beat 2 of them to death there on the way down the trench of the first 8. I beat them to death with my rifle. And I chased them I chased the last two. One of them was wounded, and the other one, and another one, they dove into this machine gun bunker. And so I ran over to the machine gun bunker and fired a burst through the door, and then crawled up on top of the bunker, and I had one hand grenade of white phosphorus, and I pulled a pin on it and reached down and rolled it in the back door. And when it went off, you could hear a bunch of them screaming. Two of them come out, they was burning bad, and I was on top of them at the back door as they come out, and I just shot both of them in the head, and I just let the rest of them burn. And I went around the corner of the trench, and here come about 35 Chinese chasing, coming toward me. And I couldn't run because I didn't have a place to run. And so I let out a war whoop again and went after them. After them, we were like two freight trains that were coming at each other down that trench. And as I got probably to closest to you people there, the first guy there, he had emptied a burp gun into me, and I could feel the bullets tugging at my clothes, but I never got hit. And all at once, the first guy broke, and then the second guy broke, and all at once, all of them were running from me, and I was bouncing off the trenches. I ran after them, and I was missing them. So I just stopped and started shooting them in the back of the head, and just laid a trench full of them. And they made a turn in the trench to run down the back of the hill what was left, and I jumped out of the trench and cut across and cut them off and was shooting them as I went. And in that close-in firefight, I ran out of ammunition, and I went back to the where I started in with the first Chinese, and some kid come running up, and just as he got there, a Chinaman there fired a burst at both of us, and he got him and missed me, and I just picked the kid. I looked at the Chinaman, and he run, and so I picked this kid up and started walking down the hill, and then the Chinese come running down behind me trying to bayonet me and shoot me, but there wasn't nothing I could do about it because I didn't have no ammunition, and I wasn't going to drop that kid. And so I just kept walking, and they were running behind me trying to bayonet me, and all at once, some of the wounded men down there, including this artillery fort observer who was shot in the chest, they come running out there and started firing at these people, and they was knocking them down all around me. And I was turning my head and watching them fall. And it got kind of funny because all these people were trying to kill me and nobody could. And so I started laughing as I walked down the hill, and I got down to this artillery fort observer, the lieutenant, and he stopped me. He said, "Soldier, what's your name?" I said, "Hell, sir, my name's Rosser." And he said, "Do you know what you're doing?" I said, "Yes, sir, I'm killing these varmints as fast as I can." But I said, "I'm out of ammo. I gotta get me some damn ammo." And he said, "I want to shake your hand." And I thought, well, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard of, shaking hands in the middle of a firefight. But I laid the kid down and shook hands with that lieutenant and picked the kid back up and took him back under a ridge where they couldn't get him with direct fire. And so I started crawling around the dead and wounded, and it got me a whole bunch of hand grenades. I had about 13 or 14 hand grenades stuck inside of my pockets or inside of my coat or wherever, and hanging off my belt, and several magazines from a carbine. And so I just put a 30-round magazine, in my carbine, and threw it around in the chamber, slung it on my back, took 2 hand grenades and pulled a pin and held the spoons down and turned around and started dog trotting back up them hill toward them Chinese. And they were shooting up a storm. And as I passed that second lieutenant, I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, "See you later, Lieutenant." And he looked at me real funny, because I'm going up there myself against a whole bunch of them. And the first time up, I took on about 70 Chinese close in. And when I got to the top, I blasted my way through the Chinese and got on top of the mountain in the middle of them. And I was throwing hand grenades and shooting and just raising heck in general. And I'd engaged about 200 Chinese this time. And one of them threw the darn hand grenade and got me in the, I'd already been hitting the hand by then, and just ripped my hand a little bit. And this guy threw a hand grenade and got me through the piece, hit me in the shoulder and went through my shoulder. And kind of made me mad because that was my 4th time I'd got hit. And I took after the varmint, and I chased him through about 20 more Chinese and shot a couple of them on the way through. and I got to, I finally caught up with him and shot him. And as I turned around to try to work my way back, the Chinese swarmed in on me. And it was kind of funny because my regimental commander was watching me through binoculars at that time from the outpost. And one of them jumped on my back and had me around the neck. And I actually thought the fool was trying to cut my throat. And he had me worried for a minute. And another one grabbed me dove and grabbed me by the leg, and he was trying to pull my legs together to drag me down. And at the same time, another one was beating me with his rifle. And about a dozen more started piling on me. And my regimental commander, he told me later what had happened. He said, I turned to one of my staff people and said, he's gone, there's no hope. He raised his glasses up again and took another look, and I'd killed them all. And then I started running back through the Chinese, howling like a wild man, you know. And it tends to tense them up a little bit there. It makes them a little slow, because in a place like that, you live with a split second. And I fought with them until I ran out of ammunition again. And I got worked my way back to the trench where I knocked out the first Chinese. And this Chinaman run up right in my face there. I was in the trench, and he'd come in on top of me with a submachine gun and stuck it right in my face and started to shoot me. And I was empty, but he didn't know it. And I raised my carbine up and stuck it in his face. And for about a second, we just looked at each other, and I let out a war scream and real wild scream. And he threw his hands up in front of his face there and almost dropped his weapon and turned around and run like a rabbit. I bluffed him. And so I stepped out of the trench, and I picked up a kid that had just got hit and started walking down the mountain again. And I come down through there, and this lieutenant was down behind the rock still shooting and shaking his head at me. He couldn't believe it. And the Chinese started bunching up because all of our people were wounded. Everybody was gone. And by that time, I had already been hit twice. And so I went around, because the Chinese were bunching up to hit us. I was crawled around. I couldn't get any ammunition from my carbine, but I got about a half a dozen hand grenades, and I went charging back up into them and kind of busted up their counterattack. And I went back down. I told the captain, I said, Captain, you better get your people out of here. You're going to lose everybody. And he said, can you get them out for me? Because he was pretty bad off. And I said, I'll get them out for you if I can, Captain. And so I picked 4 walking wounded, and we got in this shell hole and got as much ammunition as we could from the other guys. And I told the other boys that were still walking, I said, you gather up the dead and wounded, everyone you can find, and drag them down the mountain there and put them on. By that time, 4 tanks had moved up into the valley, and they drug the wounded men over to, drug them down the mountain over to the tanks and loaded them on. And the ones that could came back up the mountain and got more. Some of them they were dead. We just slid them down the mountain and let the guys pick them up down there. And finally, one of the kids said, I think we got them all, Ron. I said, okay. I said, let's get the heck out of here. And we got up and started walking down that mountain, and the Chinese never fired another shot at us. And somebody asked me why. I said, personally, I think they was glad to see us go. And I went on back to my outpost there and patched up my holes and went on back to work and calling in fire on the enemy all over the place. And about 3 days later, my company commander called me up. He said, Corporal Rosser, he said, you're in for the Medal of Honor? I said, you're kidding. You know, I couldn't think of a thing I'd done other than what anybody else had done, because I had done nothing more than the rest of them were trying to do. Nothing more. There wasn't nothing special what I did. I just got away with it. Kind of a crazy thing, and I got away with it. And but all the men that survived that battle, every one of them recommended me for the Medal of Honor, and I got the fastest Medal of Honor in the Korean War. I was ordered off the line by my regimental commander, and I wouldn't come off. And he said, I'll get back with you. And then a general ordered me off the line, and I told my regimental commander, I said, you tell that general 2 things. One, I'm not coming off the line, and if it bothers me anymore, he can take that medal and stick it where the sun don't shine. because I was more interested in saving these kids, protecting these kids, because that was my job. And that was the only thing I was doing. I was trying to do what I was trained to do. There wasn't nothing special about it, just doing what I was trained to do. And it kind of ended there. I stayed on the line until my regiment pulled off, and I went off with them. I never left the front until then. But that's all that happened that day. Just kind of kept me busy. And I want to thank you folks, sir, for inviting me over here. It's been an honor to be here.
What can I say besides wow? Wow. As the superintendent of Saugerty Central School, yesterday I was made very proud by the students who attended an assembly to meet all of the gentlemen who are speaking today. And I was particularly proud because I would say that the children, and they were all from grades 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. So they were young, and the stories were a little more succinct and without as much detail. But the message was so powerful. The message collectively from each one of these individuals was so powerful. But what made me the most proud was that our children gave what I would have called a true hero's welcome to all of the veterans, but specifically to a gentleman from our own backyard, from Saugerties, New York, the first Medal of Honor winner in the Vietnam War, and a gentleman who, when I learned about him, which was years ago, my initial reaction of the story of Roger Donlan was that, boy, this sounds an awful lot like a John Wayne movie. And today I got a chance to ask him. I said, Colonel Donlan, that movie, The Green Berets, how much of that was based on what your group had accomplished? And he shared something with me that it was only about a year and a half ago that he learned that some people very close to him did actually participate in the making of the movie The Green Berets. I also let everyone know yesterday that many people, and if you're from the Hudson Valley, you've probably heard that we have someone who's a little famous because they've been on Saturday Night Live and they've been in movies and they have a talk show. And people assume that perhaps Jimmy Fallon was one of the most the best graduates from Saugerty Central School District. And I reassured everyone yesterday, as I do anytime the question is asked, that the individual for whom we are most proud of having been in our community and graduating from our school district is Colonel Roger Donlan. And I'd like to invite Colonel Donlan up at this point to speak.
Well, I'm going to challenge the superintendent on one issue. He just told you how proud he was yesterday. Well, there was no one prouder than me in that assembly yesterday. Having been born and raised in Saugerties and to come back home, I could feel and I could hear the two words that every warrior dreams and prays and hopes to hear someday. And the spirit emanated what those two words are. Welcome home. Thank you, students. Thank you, faculty, for the welcome home again. I'm going to diverse a little bit. I can't follow Ron Rosser. It's too bloody up here. I have a little compass that I carry with me. It's a compass that was presented to by my hometown back in 1989, 25 years after the Battle of Nam Dong. Why do I carry it with me? It's very special because with this compass they gave me a little certificate. It was a tenderfoot certificate. They go hand in hand. The certificate's the only thing I have with my father's signature on it. Paul A. Donlan, private quartermaster, World War I. This is a World War I quartermaster compass issued to the Boy Scout troop that I belonged to, Troop 36. My father signed that certificate just before I became a tenderfoot, authorizing those scoutmasters to become my surrogate father, for he was on his deathbed. So I knew Daddy for 10 years, but I picked up a few lessons that he passed on in those short 10 years. And the lesson that I'm going to share with you was the same lesson that was shared by every veteran here today. Daddy emphasized and re-emphasized to me and all of my brothers and sisters, and there were 10 of us. Small family compared to Ron Rosser with his 18. But Daddy reminded us, remember that your word is your bond, and your signature is the seal to that bond. So when he signed that scout card, he was saying that what a scout is. He's taught as a young scout, the first thing you become is trustworthy. And if there's a single message that any of us would echo and re-echo today to the young students here today, as veterans, is become a trustworthy person and associate with trustworthy people. And if you have to be reminded, reach in your pocket and pull out a coin or a dollar bill, and it's there. In God we trust. The other message that was echoed and re-echoed this morning, how many veterans have said that they relied on God to save them and to guide them? Trust in God as He trusts in you. Our nation is putting our trust in you as the next generation, the next greatest generation. I usually don't get this nervous, but I've been recently diagnosed with Parkinson's, so I'm shaking a little longer. When I get around Ron Rosser, he makes me very nervous. I think everyone by now recognizes this. Certainly in World War II, veterans recognize the service flag. You young students, you recognize what it is? It's called the service flag. Its origin was World War I. When Johnny went off to war, the parents said, let's start a tradition. And they hung a flag like this. I saw one similar to this. It was handmade. It was shown to me by my grandmother. She made it for my father when he went off to World War I. And others, brothers, uncles, aunts, uncles rather. What I recall, in 1943, coming home from Mass one morning, my mother asked me, help me to do something special, Roger, when we get home. I said, certainly, Mother. And what it was to put a service flag in our front window for my brother Paul. And I couldn't help but think about Paul as we heard our first speaker this morning talking about Anzio and marching into Rome, landing in southern France, the same route that my brother Paul took. And we prayed that he would return home safely. He returned home safely, wounded though, but this blue service flag was never turned into a gold flag, symbolizing killed in action. Although I do have a service flag at home, which is a gold flag, and that belongs to my wife, whose first husband was killed in Vietnam. Service is the second message that I want to convey to the young students of today. First, trustworthy, and secondly, remember, you're here because of the service rendered by other people. And as we think and we take a back azimuth on life and the life of the people that have touched our lives, now start thinking about the lives of the people that you're going to be touching. Instill in them to be trustworthy persons. Instill in them the spirit and willingness to serve someone else, serve a cause greater than self. And in closing, I would like to say, and I'm getting a hand and arm signal from Ronald Rosser back there, and it's a special secret signal. All sergeants have a way of telling officers, remember, never get between the chow line and the troops. And I can hear stomachs growling right now. So I'll close by sharing with you a special gift that was given to me almost 45 years ago. And it's a simple message. The message is inscribed in this wedding band. It's what we are. It's God's gift to us. It's what we become will be our gift to God. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you, and God bless you. Let's eat. I'm available for questions if there are.
Do we have any questions that anyone would like to ask of Colonel Donlan at this point?
Don't get between the chow.
Just quickly.
Oh.
You were wounded in Vietnam?
Correct.
What was the extent of your wound?
I was lucky. All I got was hand grenades and mortars. Shoulder, leg, gut, and stomach, face. But as was indicated earlier by other veterans, there are visible wounds and there are invisible wounds. And everybody that's been in a hostile environment carries scars for life. Some of the deepest scars are when you lose one of your friends, one of your close friends. And we in Special Forces, we train as a tight team, intense training. We come like brothers. And when my first sergeant was reported to killed, he was my team sergeant. Then the next sergeant that was killed in action was Sergeant John Houston. What was special? They were special because they were sergeants. They were special because they were members of the team. But they were special in another way. Both their wives were carrying children, expecting. Pop Alamo, my senior non-com, his wife gave birth to a child, died shortly thereafter. John Houston gave birth to twins. He shared with me the night before the battle, he got a letter from Alice saying they were going to have twins. I shared with the joy, and we said a short prayer of gratitude. Little did I know, he shared that letter only with me. 10 days later in the hospital, I found out I was the only one who knew about those twins. Alice gave premature birth to those twins. Only one survived. George is now 49 years old. John Houston Jr., his name is inscribed on the same headstone as his father, John Houston Sr., at Arlington. So I share that because the wounds of war go deep. The casualties of war go beyond the battlefield. So we carry scars that are not visible. But with the help of God, he gives us enough grace and courage to continue to fight the next battle. Right now, I'm shaking the battle, trying to shake it off. Thanks for the question.